There's a very specific kind of exhaustion that nobody talks about. It happens when you stand in the middle of your own room and feel completely defeated by it. The clothes on the chair, the dishes in the sink, the unopened packages sitting by the door for days. You keep telling yourself you will deal with it later, but later never comes. And after a while, the mess stops looking like a mess. It starts feeling like proof that something inside you is no longer working the way it used to. Other people look at your room and see laziness, but they do not see the invisible fight happening in your head every single day. Because sometimes the hardest part is not cleaning, it's believing you still have the energy to begin. Most people think a messy house comes from laziness, but for many people it comes from exhaustion so deep it becomes invisible. Not the kind of exhaustion that makes you collapse dramatically, the quieter kind. The kind where simple tasks slowly start feeling heavier every week. You walk past the same pile of clothes every day. You notice the dishes, you notice the dust, you notice all of it. And that's the painful part. You're not ignoring the mess, you're hyper aware of it. Your brain keeps reminding you constantly. Every unfinished task becomes background noise that never fully shuts off. After a while, your home stops feeling like a place to rest. It starts feeling like physical evidence of how overwhelmed you have become. And eventually, even thinking about cleaning becomes exhausting before you even begin. Because for some people, the problem is not motivation at all. The problem is that their brain no longer knows how to handle the overload. For some people, cleaning does not feel physically difficult. It feels mentally impossible. You pick up a shirt from the floor, you walk toward the closet, then you notice a book on the desk that should be in the living room. You carry the book into the living room. There is an empty coffee mug sitting on the table. Now you're walking toward the kitchen. Halfway there, you remember the laundry. Then your phone vibrates. Then suddenly, 20 minutes disappear. And somehow, the shirt is still in your hand. This is what executive dysfunction often feels like. Your brain struggles to prioritize what matters first. Every object competes equally for your attention. The mess becomes louder and louder until your mind stops knowing where to begin. That is why people can stare at a messy room for hours and still feel frozen. Not because they want to live that way, but because overwhelm slowly shuts down the brain's ability to take action. And when that overwhelm lasts long enough, it can start affecting far more than just your house. It can begin changing the way you feel about yourself. At some point, the mess stops being physical. It becomes psychological. Because every single object in a cluttered room starts asking something from you. Should I keep this? Should I throw it away? Where does this belong? Why didn't I deal with this sooner? And your brain has to process every one of those questions constantly. That is why cleaning can become strangely exhausting before you even touch anything. People think clutter is just too much stuff. But often, clutter is actually a pile of postponed decisions, tiny unfinished conversations between you and your own mind. And the longer they sit there, the heavier they become emotionally. Eventually, even looking around the room can trigger stress, guilt, and avoidance at the same time. So instead of cleaning, your brain chooses the only thing that temporarily feels safer, avoiding it completely. And when avoidance turns into a daily pattern, the mess slowly starts affecting something much deeper than just productivity. It starts affecting your emotional state itself. For some people, a messy room is not just a bad habit. It is a warning sign. Because depression does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like unopened mail, laundry that never gets folded, trash that slowly piles up beside the bed. When your nervous system is overwhelmed for too long, even small tasks can start feeling emotionally heavy. And ADHD can make this even worse. Not because the person is lazy, but because their brain struggles with task initiation, prioritization, and mental regulation. That is why someone can spend hours thinking about cleaning while still being unable to move. From the outside, it makes no sense, but inside the brain, Every task already feels exhausting before it even begins. Over time, the room slowly becomes more than just clutter. It becomes a physical reflection of emotional fatigue. And eventually, many people stop inviting others over. They stop opening the curtains. They stop feeling comfortable inside their own home. Not because they enjoy the chaos, but because shame quietly convinces them they no longer know how to escape it. And unfortunately, the more shame people feel about the mess, the harder it often becomes to finally change it. One of the cruelest parts about living in a messy environment is the shame that comes with it. Because after a while, the mess stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling personal. You begin apologizing before people even enter your home. You avoid unexpected visitors. You tell yourself you will clean before anyone sees how bad it has become. But shame rarely creates action. More often, it creates paralysis. The more guilty people feel, the more emotionally overwhelming the mess becomes. And the more overwhelming it becomes, the more they avoid it. It turns into a cycle that quietly feeds itself. That is why criticism usually doesn't help. Being called lazy, irresponsible, or disgusting often pushes people even deeper into avoidance. Because when someone already feels emotionally exhausted, shame does not create energy. It removes the little energy they still had left. And strangely enough, not every messy environment comes from emotional collapse. Sometimes the psychology behind clutter is far more unexpected. Interestingly, psychology has found that messy environments are not always connected to dysfunction. Sometimes they are connected to creativity. Studies have shown that more chaotic spaces can encourage novelty thinking and unconventional ideas. Creative minds often focus so intensely on imagination, ideas, or problem solving that physical organization becomes mentally unimportant in comparison. That does not mean clutter is healthy, and it does not mean every messy person is secretly a genius, but it does challenge the idea that cleanliness is always a sign of discipline and messiness is always a sign of failure. Human minds are more complicated than that. Sometimes a cluttered room is a sign of emotional exhaustion, and sometimes it is simply the byproduct of a brain that experiences the world differently. But regardless of where the mess comes from, most people eventually reach the same emotional question. How do I finally regain control over my own space and my own mind? The truth is, most people do not reclaim their lives through one massive transformation. They reclaim them through very small moments. One dish washed, one corner cleaned, one piece of trash finally thrown away. Because cleaning is not always about productivity. Sometimes it is about teaching your nervous system that things are manageable again. That is why small actions matter psychologically. They interrupt helplessness. They remind the brain that progress is still possible. And slowly, the room begins to change, but more importantly, the way you feel inside it begins to change too. The shame becomes quieter. The overwhelm becomes lighter. The space starts feeling safe again. A clean room will not solve trauma. It will not cure depression. It will not magically fix your life. But sometimes it can become the first small sign that you have not completely given up on yourself. And maybe that's what people misunderstand most about messy homes. Sometimes they're not signs of laziness at all. Sometimes they're signs that someone has simply been struggling silently for a very long time. Maybe behind some messy homes, there are simply people carrying invisible exhaustion that nobody else can see. So if you saw yourself somewhere in this video, know that you are not alone. And if this video helped you feel understood, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your experience below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.